You carry 2 heavy bags from the car to your door, and within seconds your hands tighten and your shoulders begin to complain. For you, the effort ends when the bags reach the kitchen. For many ancient people, physical strain did not end after a few minutes. Food, water, fuel, tools, hides, and building materials still had to be moved by hand, often across difficult ground. The same demanding motions returned day after day, year after year. Their bodies were shaped by work they could not avoid. But did that make ancient humans genuinely stronger than you, or simply stronger at the tasks their lives required? The answer changes depending on which ancient body is examined. Neanderthals had broad trunks, large joints, and heavily built limbs. Mobile hunter-gatherers often placed constant stress on their legs and hips. Some prehistoric farmers traveled less, yet their arms and shoulders absorbed years of grinding, digging, lifting, and carrying. These people did not develop one universal form of strength. Their bodies adapted to different pressures. A strong leg was not the same as a strong arm, and a skeleton built for repeated labor was not necessarily built to win a modern weightlifting competition. The muscles that performed this work are gone, so their strength cannot be measured directly. What remains is bone. Its outer walls can become reinforced. Its internal structure can change under repeated pressure. One arm may develop differently from the other, while an injured limb may weaken after years of limited use. Medicine explains how these changes happen. Archaeology connects them to real tools, occupations, and environments. Together, they allow researchers to identify where ancient bodies carried exceptional loads and to separate genuine physical evidence from the myth that every person in the past was stronger than every person alive today. A skeleton does not preserve strength the way a photograph preserves a face. It keeps fragments of the story. Researchers examine the shafts of long bones, the surfaces of joints, old fractures, damaged vertebrae, and differences between the right and left sides. They also study the tools, terrain, and daily activities associated with the remains. No single clue is enough. A thick arm bone may reflect repeated labor, but body size and ancestry also matter. A worn shoulder may come from work, age, injury, or several causes together. The investigation begins by accepting that bone is evidence, not a confession. During life, bone is never completely finished. Old tissue is removed, new tissue is added, and the structure is adjusted as the body grows and works. When force repeatedly passes through the same area, the skeleton may reinforce that area. The response is especially important during childhood and adolescence, when bone is still developing. But work does not act alone. Nutrition, hormones, disease, body size, injury, and inherited anatomy all shape the final result. An ancient bone therefore contains several histories at once: the body a person inherited, the conditions in which they grew, and the physical demands they repeatedly faced. One part of that history is written in the hard outer wall of long bones. Researchers do not look only at whether the wall is thick. They examine where the material is positioned around the shaft. A hollow tube can resist bending more effectively when more of its material lies farther from the center. Human bones follow the same mechanical principle. Scans of a femur or upper arm bone can reveal the directions in which it was repeatedly reinforced. This helps estimate resistance to bending and twisting. It does not reveal how much weight the person lifted in one attempt. Another record lies inside the joints. There, bone forms a delicate three-dimensional framework of tiny supporting struts. This internal network responds to the forces that regularly pass through the hip, shoulder, knee, and ankle. A hip that carries a body across long distances may develop differently from one that spends much of the day resting in a chair. The pattern can show that a joint was habitually loaded and indicate the directions of that loading. It still cannot reconstruct the vanished muscles, the person's technique, or the maximum force produced during one dramatic movement. This difference matters because bone strength and muscle strength are related, but they are not identical. Muscle force depends on muscle size, tendon position, joint angle, coordination, nerve control, fatigue, and practice. A strongly reinforced leg may belong to someone who walked and carried loads for years, rather than someone capable of a record-breaking lift. A powerful-looking upper arm may reflect moderate work repeated thousands of times. Ancient bones can show that force returned frequently. They cannot produce a grip strength reading, a lifting total, a punching force, or a reliable contest result. Muscle attachment areas once seemed to offer an easier answer. Tendons connect muscles to bone, and some attachment sites become large or rough. It was tempting to read every prominent ridge as proof of a powerful muscle. Medical research has shown that the relationship is far less direct. Age, body size, hormones, disease, injury growth, and inherited anatomy all affect these surfaces. Two people performing similar work may leave different marks. Attachment sites become useful only when they agree with other evidence, such as bone geometry, joint structure, asymmetry in jewels, and environmental context. Neanderthals remain the clearest candidates for the image of a physically powerful ancient human. Their bodies were generally shorter and broader than those of many recent humans. They had large trunks, thick limb bones, broad joints, and relatively short forearms and lower legs. This compact form helped conserve heat in cold environments, but it also provided a stable frame capable of supporting substantial muscle. Their anatomy makes high force production plausible in some movements. It does not mean every Neanderthal possessed the same strength, or that their bodies were superior in every physical task. Fossils from La Forêt in France and Spy Cave in Belgium helped establish this heavily built body pattern. The preserved arms and legs are robust, and the joint surfaces are large. When museums reconstruct these individuals, the result appears immediately powerful. Yet a reconstruction mixes what survives with what must be estimated. Bone can establish height, proportions, and some mechanical relationships. It cannot preserve exact muscle thickness, body fat, posture, or muscular definition. These fossils show that Neanderthals were strongly constructed. They do not show how one of them would perform with a barbell, a stopwatch, or modern sports technique. Kebara Cave in Israel adds another piece of the body. The preserved skeleton includes important parts of the spine, ribs, pelvis, and limbs. It helped researchers understand that the Neanderthal torso was not simply a modern human chest made slightly wider. It belonged to a distinct body plan. A broad trunk could support large muscles and stabilize demanding movements, while a wide pelvis transferred force through the lower body. But some of this shape came from ancestry and climate adaptation rather than labor. Strength developed within the Neanderthal body plan. Physical work did not create every feature of that plan. The arms tell a more personal story. Many Neanderthal upper arm bones are noticeably different on the right and left sides, with one side often the right more strongly reinforced. That difference suggests years of unequal loading. One arm repeatedly produced or resisted force in a way the other did not. A single hunt or accident would be unlikely to create such a long-term structural pattern. The bones point toward habitual behavior. They still do not identify the exact activity. To move from anatomy to action, researchers must compare the pattern with tools, injuries, and experiments using repeated ancient-style movements. Spear use was once treated as the obvious explanation. A strong dominant arm seemed to fit the image of Neanderthals repeatedly thrusting heavy weapons. Experiments complicated that story. Hide scraping, cutting, woodworking, pulling resistant material, and holding an object steady with one hand while the other applies force can also create uneven loading. Weapon use may have contributed, but it is not the only possible cause. The less dramatic explanation may be closer to daily reality. Ancient strength was probably built as much through preparing hides, repairing tools, and processing materials as through moments of hunting. At Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, the skeletons preserve both heavy use and physical decline. Shanidar once survived serious injuries and had one arm that was greatly reduced after long-term damage and limited use. The weakened limb shows the reverse of normal loading. When a body part stops carrying its usual forces, the bone can lose structure over time. Other individuals at Shanidar preserve trauma and joint damage from physically demanding lives. These remains demonstrate that ancient bodies were not permanently robust. Their skeletons change with activity, injury, illness, recovery, and the loss of movement. The Neanderthal verdict is therefore impressive but limited. Their compact frames, large joints, reinforced limbs, and probable musculature suggest that many could produce substantial force. Compared with a modern adult who performs little physical labor, they were probably stronger in several whole-body tasks. Compared with a trained power athlete, the result is unknown. Modern competitors specialize in measured movements, use refined technique, receive consistent nutrition, and plan recovery. Neanderthals developed broad functional strength through mixed work. The bones justify describing them as powerful. They do not justify invented percentages, lifting totals, or guaranteed victories. Prehistoric Homo sapiens hunter-gatherers often carried a different form of strength. Many were more lightly built than Neanderthals, but their hips and leg bones still show substantial resistance to bending and twisting. Their skeletons were shaped by regular movement across landscapes, carrying food and materials, climbing, and working on uneven ground. A bone does not need to look massive to be mechanically strong. Its material can be arranged efficiently for the forces it repeatedly faces. These people may not have shared the compact upper body power of Neanderthals, but their lower bodies often carried a long history of mobility and load-bearing. A major European study examined roughly 1,800 skeletons across about 30,000 years. It found that lower limb strength relative to body size declined as communities became more settled and average mobility decreased. The change was gradual. Farming did not suddenly produce weak legs in a single generation. Instead, people traveled over smaller territories, and the mechanical demands placed on their lower bodies shifted over time. Farmers still worked hard, but their legs were no longer loaded in the same way as those of highly mobile foragers. The evidence links skeletal change to daily behavior rather than to a simple biological decline. The internal framework of the hip points in the same direction. Highly mobile foragers and some fossil humans often show more substantial internal bone than recent sedentary comparison groups. A hip that repeatedly supports walking, carrying, climbing, and balance develops under a different mechanical environment from one that spends long periods unloaded. The contrast is not simply ancient against modern. A modern manual worker or athlete may maintain strongly loaded bones, while an ancient person affected by illness or reduced activity may not. The skeleton responds to use. The strongest difference often lies between an active life and an inactive one, not between two historical periods. Hunter-gatherers did not share one universal body. Comparative evidence from southern Africa, the Andaman Islands, Tierra del Fuego, and other regions reveals different patterns in the arms and legs. A group that walked long distances across open terrain placed different forces on the body from a community that paddled, climbed, hauled coastal resources, or relied heavily on particular tools. Climate, terrain, technology, childhood development, and the division of labor all mattered. Two populations could both be extremely active while developing different skeletal signatures. Ancient strength was local. It was shaped by what survival demanded in one landscape. Farming produced one of the most important reversals in the story. In many settled populations, loading of the legs declined as long-distance travel became less common. But hard work did not disappear. Digging, harvesting, carrying water, preparing hides, building, moving stored food, and processing grain placed repeated stress on the arms, shoulders, and spine. Agriculture did not simply make human bodies weaker. It changed where force was concentrated. Some lower limbs became less robust, while the upper body continued to absorb years of demanding labor. Strength was redistributed because the work itself had been redistributed. Prehistoric women from Neolithic and Bronze Age Central Europe provide striking evidence of that change. Researchers compared the structure of their upper arm bones with those of modern women, including trained rowers. Some ancient groups showed values that overlapped with or exceeded those of the athletic comparison group. This does not mean the prehistoric women would win a rowing race. It means their arms had experienced exceptionally high loading over many years. Grain processing, farming, carrying, hide preparation, construction, weaving, and other forms of labor may all have contributed to the skeletal result. The comparison with rowers also shows why accumulated bone loading is not the same as athletic performance. A rowing competition depends on cardiovascular capacity, technique, coordination, timing, and specialized practice. The prehistoric women were not training for a single event. Their bodies were adapting to varied work repeated because households and communities depended on it. The bones reveal the duration and intensity of that workload, not the exact size of the muscles or the force produced in one movement. They also challenge the assumption that ancient physical strength belonged mainly to male hunters. Evidence from Jomon communities in Japan provides another regional example. Many Jomon groups relied on hunting, fishing, gathering, and intensive use of local resources. Studies of their thigh bones have found stronger shaft geometry than in several recent Japanese comparison samples. The pattern is consistent with greater habitual lower limb loading. But Jomon life varied across regions and through thousands of years. Coastal communities, inland groups, and people living in different periods did not all use their bodies in the same way. The evidence supports local adaptation to demanding activity, not a single timeless Joman physique. At Runka in South Australia, long bone structure records active lives, but also differences in how the upper and lower body were loaded. At Windover in Florida, the feet and lower limbs preserve evidence consistent with repeated movement and load bearing in a wetland environment. Neither site provides a complete measurement of whole body strength. Their value lies in comparison. Terrain, carrying, water travel, tool use, and local work produce different maps of force across the skeleton. Ancient people were not built from one physical template. Their bones became records of the tasks their communities performed most often. So, were ancient humans stronger than us? Many were probably stronger than an average sedentary modern adult in the work their lives demanded. Neanderthals were robust and likely capable of substantial force. Mobile hunter-gatherers often developed strongly loaded legs and hips. Some prehistoric farmers developed exceptional upper arm strength through years of repetitive labor. But ancient people were not universally stronger than modern manual workers or elite athletes. Fossils preserve habitual loading, not complete athletic ability. The ancient body was shaped by work that could not be skipped, and every part of the skeleton carried a different piece of that story.